Welcome to today's episode of Fame Factor by Skoob, and I am your host, Sonia Lambert. We're going to talk about one of the most complicated, controversial, and deeply troubling stories in modern entertainment history. It's about a man who was simultaneously called the greatest entertainer who ever lived and accused of some of the most heinous crimes imaginable. This is the story of Michael Jackson's sexual abuse scandal. And I need to warn you up front. This gets dark, it gets detailed, and it's going to make you uncomfortable. But these are facts that deserve examination. Michael Jackson once said something that feels eerily prophetic now. To me, the biggest sin of all sins is to be given a gift, a talent, because it's actually a gift from God. To take that and not cultivate it and make it grow, that's the biggest sin in the world. He was talking about wasting talent, but when you look at the full arc of his story, you can't help but wonder if there was another sin he wasn't acknowledging. Let's start with who Michael Jackson was before everything fell apart. Born in 1958, he became the lead singer of the Jackson 5 at just 6 years old. 6. While most kids were learning to tie their shoes, he was performing on Motown stages with his brothers, belting out hits like I Want You Back and ABC. He later reflected on this saying, I was a veteran before I was a teenager. His childhood wasn't a childhood. It was a relentless work schedule that molded him into a performer, but robbed him of something fundamental. Then came 1979 and his solo album Off the Wall, followed by 1982's Thriller, which became the best-selling album of all time worldwide. 7 top 10 singles from one album. His music videos for Billie Jean and Thriller weren't just videos. They were short films that broke racial barriers on MTV and redefined what the medium could be. When he moonwalked during his Billie Jean performance at Motown 25 in 1983, it became one of the most iconic moments in television history. Albums like Bad and Dangerous continued his dominance. Over a dozen Grammy Awards, including the Grammy Legend Award. Guinness World Records named him the most successful entertainer of all time. He was everywhere. He was everything. And he seemed untouchable. But here's where the story takes its first turn into something unsettling. By the early 1990s, Jackson had built himself a fantasy world, literally. He named his ranch Neverland after the Peter Pan stories, the place where children never have to grow up. He publicly hung out with young stars like Emmanuel Lewis and Macaulay Culkin. He talked openly about relating to Peter Pan because of his intense childhood in show business. On the surface, it seemed like a mega-rich celebrity creating a theme park for kids. But looking back, there were red flags waving that nobody wanted to see. Jackson defended his close relationships with children with statements that now sound incredibly disturbing. He said, "Why can't you share your bed? The most loving thing to do is to share your bed with someone." At the time, his fans explained it away. Now, that statement hangs in the air like a dark cloud. This brings us to Jordan Chandler. The way they met has been surrounded by myths. One rumor claimed Jordy sent Jackson a get-well card with his photo and phone number after Jackson's 1984 Pepsi commercial accident where his hair caught fire. But Jordy was only 4 then, so that's impossible. Another story suggested Jordy auditioned for a Jackson commercial, but that was never confirmed. What we know for certain is that their actual meeting was fairly ordinary at first. Jordy was shy, barely talking, while his mother June was bubbly and excited, telling Jackson how thrilled they were and mentioning they'd met him once before. As Jackson was leaving in a rented car, June pushed to give him Jordy's phone number. Jackson pocketed it, shook Jordy's hand, and said he'd call. A few days later, that distinctive high-pitched voice was on the phone asking for Jordy. June later claimed she initially turned down Jackson's first invitation for Jordy to visit because he was studying for 7th grade finals. But people who knew her said she'd never refuse something like that. And considering everything that followed, that seems more than believable. Jackson was about to leave for his Dangerous World Tour, but he and Jordy kept in close touch by phone. Jackson would call often while traveling, and they'd talk for hours. Jordy remembered Jackson describing Neverland in vivid detail: the rides, the animals, how much fun it was, building up this picture of paradise. Almost a year later, after the first leg of the tour, Jordy finally got his visit. In early February 1993, Jackson sent a limousine to pick up Jordy, his mother June, and Jordy's 5-year-old half-sister Lily. They stayed in the Neverland guest house for the weekend. The highlight was a private late-night shopping trip to Toys R Us, where the kids could grab whatever they wanted. It was every child's fantasy. A few days after they went home, Jackson invited them back for the next weekend. This time, Jackson himself showed up in the limo to get them. But he wasn't alone. Sitting with him was another boy, 11-year-old Brett. The family was surprised. Jordy later admitted he felt jealous seeing Jackson with another kid. Think about that. A 13-year-old boy feeling jealous over a 30-something man's attention. That's not normal friendship. That's something else entirely. By this point, the relationship was firmly established. Regular calls, frequent visits, and access to Jackson's private world that few people ever saw. Now we need to talk about Evan Chandler, Jordy's biological father. Evan was a dentist and screenwriter, and by all accounts, his relationship with June was contentious after their divorce. In the spring of 1993, Jackson stayed at the Chandler Schwartz home for 5 days. That's when Evan's suspicions apparently began. Evan noted that Jackson slept in a room with Jordy and his stepbrother. He later stated they were always clothed when he saw them in bed together, and he never claimed to have witnessed sexual misconduct. But something bothered him. The contact between Jordy and Jackson ended in June 1993. Here's where things get messy. Evan reportedly encouraged Jackson to build an extension onto Jackson's house, and when that was denied, he suggested Jackson buy him a house. Were these innocent suggestions or early attempts at extortion? It depends on who you believe. What happened next changed everything. There are claims that sodium amytal, a sedative sometimes called truth serum, was used during a dental procedure when one of Jordy's baby teeth was being removed. Evan's anesthesiologist friend allegedly administered it. When Jordy woke up, his father asked if anything had happened between him and Michael. Jordy replied, "Yes." Some argue this confession was coerced or influenced by the drug. Others say sodium amytal doesn't make people create false memories. It just lowers inhibitions. The truth? We'll probably never know for certain. What we do know is that Jordy was taken to see Dr. Mathis Abrams, a Beverly Hills psychiatrist. During a roughly 3-hour session, Jordy gave graphic accounts of masturbation and oral sex with Jackson. He claimed the abuse happened on many occasions, at several locations, including Neverland. He reportedly described Jackson's genitals in detail. The news broke in August 1993, just as the second leg of Jackson's Dangerous World Tour began. It was a media explosion. Jackson canceled the rest of the tour, citing health issues brought on by the scandal. The Los Angeles Police Department launched a criminal investigation that was massive in scope. A task force included the Santa Barbara Police Department. Detectives traveled internationally, even to the Philippines, to interview potential witnesses. Jackson's properties were searched under court warrants: Neverland Ranch, his Century City condominium, a Las Vegas bungalow suite, and his parents' home. During the search of his family home, officers confiscated cartons of photos and other material. The FBI assisted with the investigation. But here's the thing: they found no physical evidence against Jackson. Prosecutors presented evidence to 2 separate grand juries. Neither indicted him. The investigation was formally closed in September 1994 after the Chandlers stopped cooperating, leaving the case without its primary witness. But before that happened, there was one of the most bizarre and invasive moments in celebrity legal history: the body search. In December 1993, authorities arrived at Neverland Ranch with a warrant to visually examine and photograph Jackson's entire body, including his genitals. Why? Because Jordy had drawn a detailed sketch of Jackson's genitalia, highlighting particular marks, discolorations, and blemishes. On December 20th, Jackson stood on a small platform in a private room, disrobed, and was photographed by forensic photographers for about 25 minutes. He was never physically touched. Present were doctors, photographers, law enforcement officials, Jackson's own lawyers, a physician, a detective, and a bodyguard. Investigators were looking for skin discoloration from vitiligo, which Jackson publicly acknowledged having, or other identifying marks matching Jordy's description. Jordy had described light-colored spots similar to the color of Jackson's face on his penis, and other marks on his lower torso, buttocks, and testicles. District Attorney Thomas Snedden later stated in court filings that the photographs showed a mark on the right side of Jackson's penis, in about the same relative location as the blemish Jordy had drawn. He believed this corroborated Jordy's description. Dr. Richard Strick, the physician present during the search, said Jackson's genitalia had very odd skin coloring, areas of both dark and light pigmentation. He reportedly confirmed the photos and Jordy's description matched. But here's where it gets complicated. Jordy described Jackson as circumcised. Jackson's autopsy after his death in 2009 confirmed he was not circumcised. That's a pretty significant error. There's also debate over the color of the blemish Jordy described. Some say he mentioned a pinkish spot similar to Jackson's face color, while investigators described seeing a darker brown spot. Early media reports quoted unnamed law enforcement sources saying the photos didn't match. Jackson's defenders point to the circumcision error as proof Jordy was lying. Those who believe Jordy say even with some discrepancies, there was substantial corroboration between the drawing and the photos. Jackson later called the search the most dehumanizing ordeal of his life. The photos, descriptions, and forensic reports were never publicly released in a criminal trial, so the true match or mismatch continues to be disputed. In September 1993, the Chandlers filed a civil lawsuit against Jackson. In January 1994, a financial settlement was reached for approximately $23 million. About $5 million went to the family's lawyers. The settlement included no admission of guilt by Jackson. Jackson later stated he agreed to the settlement to prevent the lawsuit from interfering with his career, a decision he said he regretted. After the settlement, Jordy's testimony was withheld, effectively ending the possibility of criminal charges at that time. The case couldn't proceed without its star witness. This settlement has been endlessly debated. Jackson's supporters say an innocent man wouldn't pay that much money. His defenders counter that settling made financial sense. The civil trial would have interfered with his ability to work, and the amount was a fraction of what he stood to lose in canceled tours and endorsements. The settlement didn't legally prevent the Chandlers from cooperating with criminal prosecutors. But practically speaking, once they had their money, their motivation to proceed disappeared. Jump forward 10 years. Jackson's reputation had taken a beating, but he was still making music, still performing. Then came the Living with Michael Jackson documentary in 2003, where he held hands with a young cancer survivor named Gavin Arvizo and talked about sharing his bed with children. The backlash was immediate. On November 18, 2003, 60 to 70 investigators from the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's and District Attorney's offices descended on Neverland Ranch. It was a massive operation. They seized multiple computers, including a laptop found inside a locked closet in the master bathroom. They needed a locksmith to get in. They took digital cameras, computer records, legal documents, papers, a calendar from a closet, notes and letters from his bedroom nightstand, videotapes, and magazines. The court documents were heavily redacted when released to the public to protect the investigation and Jackson's right to a fair trial. But what we know is that prosecutors, led by Tom Snedden, the same DA from 1993, were building a case for child molestation, conspiracy, and administering an intoxicating agent to a minor. At the 2005 trial, prosecutors showed jurors sexually explicit magazines, DVDs, and videos seized from Neverland. Their intent was to paint Jackson as having a fixation consistent with the allegations. The judge allowed testimony about past allegations. including the 1993 case, to argue Jackson had a pattern of abuse and used Neverland as a fantasy hideaway to groom children. But the prosecution faced problems. Witnesses had to admit there was no direct evidence Jackson had shown the explicit material to Gavin. Some items had dates indicating they weren't even available until after March 12, 2003, the date the Arvizo family last left Neverland. The extensive search involving over 100 sanctioned raids didn't produce any child pornography. No smoking gun. Jackson's defense team, led by Thomas Mesereau, hammered these points. Defense attorney Mickey Sherman argued, "The proof that they didn't find such gold booty is that they didn't charge any new charges when they finally got around to charging him." They stressed the materials found were simply normal possessions of a wealthy celebrity and didn't prove Jackson abused Gavin or shared material with him. The defense's core strategy was brilliant. They painted the Arvizo family, especially the mother, as money-hungry con artists trying to extort Jackson. They promised the jury they'd prove the charges were fictitious, bogus, and never happened. They successfully shifted the focus from the circumstantial evidence to the credibility of the accusers. Jackson was acquitted on all charges. Michael Jackson's death in 2009 didn't end the controversy. It intensified it. What followed were accusations that forced the world to confront an uncomfortable paradox. A man celebrated as a once-in-a-generation musical genius, and a man repeatedly accused of horrific abuse. To some, he was a victim of greed and media frenzy. To others, the details paint a disturbing pattern that can't be ignored. The truth may be buried in sealed records, lost evidence, and memories that will never be spoken aloud. What remains is a fractured legacy, music that still defines generations, and allegations that refuse to fade. So how do we remember Michael Jackson? Can we separate the art from the artist? Or does celebrating the genius mean accepting what may have happened in its shadow? This story doesn't offer comfort or closure, but it demands reflection. Download the Skoob app now to listen to the full story and explore the questions the world still avoids.